Level design isn't just about placing platforms, enemies, or puzzles in a space. It's really about guiding the player through an experience. A good level teaches you things without explicitly telling you. It introduces mechanics step by step, builds confidence, and slowly asks more from the player as they progress. But it's also about pacing and psychology. Players need moments of challenge, but also moments to breathe. They need clear goals, but also space to explore. And most importantly, they need to feel like they're making progress, as though every section they complete is another step forward in their journey. That balance between structure, freedom, and learning is what makes a level feel good to play. Over the past few weeks, while preparing for Steam Next Fest, we realized that our opening level wasn't quite delivering that experience yet. Some areas were too open, others were too closed off, and the progression between mechanics wasn't as clear as it should be. So we ended up redesigning a large portion of the level. I mean, it was a well-thought-through decision. It definitely wasn't a consequence of feature creep. And although we were very close to showing it at Steam Next Fest, we ultimately decided to take more time and keep improving instead. Level improvements weren't the only reason we chose to skip Steam Next Fest. We still want to refine some of our animations, polish the cinematics, and work on several smaller details that will improve the overall experience. In this video, I'll walk you through how the level is structured now, the design decisions behind each segment, and what we learned during this process. Also, big disclaimer before we start, this is still not the final version. We'll definitely give it at least one more run-through before going public. But before we begin, for those of you that are new here, we're making Water Me and You, a genre-blending cozy co-op adventure that mixes exciting and dynamic gameplay elements from games like It Takes Two with the cozy and relaxing aspects of games like Animal Crossing. What that practically means is that after each linear adventure, you arrive at a new part of the world, a new woodling village. Each village brings new characters, new quests, new mechanics, and most importantly, more space for players to explore and use however they want. But back to the level. The first iteration was actually very short. It didn't really feel like an adventure. We essentially gave players a small sandbox where they could learn the basic movement mechanics and then sent them straight to the village. To nobody's surprise, that turned out to be pretty boring. More importantly, arriving at the village didn't feel nearly as rewarding as it should have. Our entire game loop is centered around adventures that eventually lead you back to the village or unlock new parts of it. So having the very first meaningful adventure happen after you've already reached the village didn't make much sense from a design perspective. That's when we realized we needed to rethink the structure. Instead of treating the opening as a short tutorial space, we decided to turn it into a proper adventure leading up to the village. And we ended up redesigning and iterating on that idea several times before it started to feel right. As the design evolved, we started thinking about the level as a journey with clear stages, places where players learn something new, overcome a challenge, and then move forward. That's how the current structure came to be. The level is now divided into 5 distinct segments, each with a clear purpose. If you're wondering why, there are 2 simple reasons. First, every segment introduces something new. We start by teaching core player mechanics and then gradually layer in level mechanics that build on what the player has already learned. Second, it's about psychology. We want people to feel a real sense of accomplishment as they move through the level. Finishing one segment should feel like completing a meaningful part of the journey before moving to the next. So let's walk through these 5 segments and the thinking behind each of them. The first segment of the level is fully linear and serves as the player's introduction to the game world. It's simple by design. Its job is to introduce movement, establish the atmosphere, and gently guide players into the rest of the level. This is where players move for the first time and begin to understand the basic controls. It's the moment where they start getting comfortable with how the character responds, how movement feels, and, to an extent, how they interact with the environment. At this stage, the goal isn't to challenge our players too much. Instead, we're creating a safe space where they can experiment with movement and understand the fundamentals without any real pressure. Through camera shifts, we also help our players solidify their grasp on controls and movement and make an introduction to something that will be used later on. Originally, this entire area was supposed to be very enclosed. Players spent a long time moving through tight cave spaces, which made the world feel smaller and more confined than we intended. In the redesign, we changed the flow of the space. Instead of staying closed the whole time, the environment now transitions from closed to open and then back to closed again. One of our goals with the level design was to constantly vary the environment so the world feels more alive. By briefly opening the space and then bringing the player back into a more controlled path, we create contrast and give players a sense that the world indeed is much bigger than what they're seeing, that this is a real place where things have happened and life once existed. The second segment shifts away from the fully linear structure and introduces the first free roam space in the level. After being guided through the opening section, players now have the freedom to explore a bit and decide where they want to go. One path introduces something new, while the other builds on something they've already learned earlier. This is also the first time players encounter an NPC who gives them a quest, which introduces an entirely new system that, with itself, also brings the inventory and journal systems. These play an important role both during adventures and later in the village, helping players keep track of their objectives and progress. Originally, these systems were only introduced once players reached the village. However, during testing, we noticed that arriving there already came with a lot of new information, new characters, new mechanics, even more systems, and all of this made the experience a bit overwhelming. By introducing the journal and inventory earlier during the first adventure, we were able to take some of that pressure off and ease players more gradually into how the game functions. A small but important side note is that giving players a quest also gives them a sense of purpose. It's no longer just, I need to get through these challenges, but rather, I understand why I'm going through them, and I'm fine with suffering for these cute little woodlings. By the time players finish this segment, they've not only learned a new mechanic, but they've also been introduced to the game's first quest, the existential dread of the world, the inventory and journal, and a more open style of level design. Oh, and I forgot to mention that you also collect stuff here, hence the inventory. The third segment returns to a linear structure, but we're again introducing something new to our players. Until now, they've pretty much gone through the level together, hand in hand. In this segment, we actually separate them for the first time, in small chunks. Both players get totally new abilities that do completely different things, which they'll soon realize. Ripples gains the ability to shoot water droplets, and Sprout can latch onto things. This is a really big deal, and we really focused on giving the players time to get comfortable with these mechanics. This is also where players begin to understand how they can directly influence the other player's path. Cooperation was present earlier, but here it becomes more deliberate. Players start encountering situations where their actions affect how their partner progresses through the level. As the segment continues, the player mechanics themselves remain the same. Shooting droplets and latching don't fundamentally change. Instead, the level mechanics built around them evolve. Players begin pulling levers, activating mechanisms, and for the first time, encountering timed events. These introduce a sense of urgency and require players to react quickly, using the mechanics they've just learned in combination with those introduced earlier. By the end of this segment, players are no longer just learning individual mechanics. They're placed in situations where they need to combine abilities, coordinate actions, and execute them within a limited window of time, reinforcing the cooperative nature of the game while increasing the challenge. So basically, this is the first area in which we're testing how well you actually work together. The fourth segment shifts back into a free roam structure, once again opening the space after a more controlled linear track. After the intensity and coordination required in the previous segment, this area gives players a bit of a breather. Instead of constantly moving forward along a fixed path, players can explore the environment more freely, though perhaps not as freely as you think. Because this segment also introduces several important gameplay elements for the first time. Most notably, this is where players receive their first weapon and encounter their first enemies. Up until this point, the focus has been on movement, cooperation, and environmental interactions. Now, players are introduced to combat as another layer of the experience. And just as our genius games designers planned, the first thing they do is start fighting each other with the new weapon. Every time without fail, which is actually super fun to watch. This segment is also where players complete their first quest, of course, once they're done battling each other. Earlier in the level, they received a quest and were introduced to the systems like their journal and inventory, but this is the moment where that loop is actually completed for the first time. Structurally, the open space once again reinforces the idea that the world is larger than the immediate path the player is following. It gives players room to explore, experiment with their new abilities, and momentarily slow the pace before the level moves into its final section. Another thing worth mentioning before we move into the final segment is that each part of the level ends with a short cinematic. It's a small touch, but we feel it helps make the experience feel more polished and gives players a little extra reward for completing a section. And here we have the fifth and final section of the level. This is where the players will use all the knowledge they've acquired and all their might to see this thing through to the end. By now, players have been introduced to movement, environmental mechanics, cooperative interactions, exploration, and combat. This final section brings all of those elements together and asks players to use them in combination. For the first time in the level, the two players are split apart more than before. Each player progresses through their own path, but their advancement depends on the actions of their partner. During testing, we discovered that this separation created some problems. When the players were too far apart, they sometimes lost track of each other. One player might continue progressing while the other got stuck. Even though that was definitely not our fault, we had to address it. One of the things we did was we adjusted the layout so that the paths remained visually connected at almost all times. Even when players are separated, they can still see each other or understand where the other player is within the space. This helps maintain the sense of cooperation while still allowing the level to challenge them individually. We also put small hidden paths that players could find fairly easily if they needed to go back and help their partner. In this segment, many of the player mechanics are also used as level mechanics. Some of them old, some of them new. Abilities that players learned earlier are now required in more complex ways, often interacting with the environment or triggering events that allow the other player to progress. The goal here is to reinforce the core cooperative design of the game. Players must stay aware of each other, communicate, and coordinate their actions in order to move forward. And finally, towards the end of the segment, we introduce something completely new, the chipmunk. We won't reveal too much about it just yet, but you can catch a small glimpse of it here. And that's a quick look of how the opening level is structured currently, and some of the design decisions that went into reshaping it over the past few weeks. We really wanted to be a part of Steam Next Fest, but we felt it was better to take a step back, avoid rushing things, and focus on delivering a more polished experience. Of course, this is only one part of the game. Once players finish this section, their journey is far from over. The next major destination waiting for them is the village, where they'll meet new characters, discover more about the world, and continue their adventure, so there's plenty left to explore. Thank you for following along our development process so far. We'll keep sharing more updates as we continue working, and as always, if you have any thoughts, feedback, feel free to let us know. We'd love to hear what you think. Tell us in the comments if you made it all the way through the devlog, wishlist Waterme and you at Steam if you'd like to support us, and share this video with someone you'd like to play a game with, or with someone you think would find it useful. Hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.